Hi there, my name is rswaty. I'm an ecologist for the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team, and I'm based out of Marquette, Michigan, on the south shore of Lake Superior. Today I want to talk to you about using LANDFIRE and Forest Stewardship Council certification. For auditors, my goal is to familiarize you with the data sets and tools so you will be prepared in case you run across it during an audit, and so you can suggest it as a resource where appropriate. For clients, you may find LANDFIRE data and tools useful for meeting criteria in Principles 6, 7, and 9, or wherever you need to perform a landscape scale assessment, consider natural disturbance regimes, or compare current to historic conditions. LANDFIRE is a large project, a partnership between many agencies, including the Department of Interior, U.S. Forest Service, and the Nature Conservancy. Our goal is to characterize vegetation, fire, and fuel characteristics across the country so that people can better do landscape scale assessments and compare land management and ecological conditions across large areas. LANDFIRE is a ton of spatial data sets. I'll explore some of those today. LANDFIRE is also descriptions of ecological conditions, and in a way, a great encyclopedia of the ecosystems of the United States and how they used to look and work prior to major European settlement. The Nature Conservancy had a cooperative agreement to describe and model reference conditions for the ecosystems of the United States. We could share many beverages discussing the relevance of reference conditions and what those might really mean. I'll say that reference conditions serve as background information, context, to help you understand how your ecosystems may have worked under natural disturbance regimes. So with that, I'm going to show you the database, an example database of how and where we collected information that describes reference conditions. I'll be focusing on my neck of the woods, Michigan, and specifically the Laurentian Acadian northern hardwood forests. Here you'll see textual information written by Mike Walters and Dave Ewert describing this ecosystem. In Michigan, we have 30 of these descriptions, which gives you an idea of the scale of the project. For the country, we have roughly 2,400 descriptions. Not all of those are unique, of course. For example, the northern hardwoods forest stretches from Michigan all the way to Maine and south down into Virginia. However, there are differences as you go across these areas, and so the descriptions capture those. We have geographic range, disturbance, vegetation, and site information here. Site information was used to help map where these biophysical settings would have been. So information such as climate, soils, superficial geology, slope, aspect, elevation may all play a role in how these were mapped. In addition to the basic information you see here, we broke these biophysical settings up into 5 or fewer succession classes. Here we'll look at succession class A. You see the basic information, a textual description here. We have canopy closure and canopy height information over to the right, and species information. We also, using Vegetation Dynamics Development Tool, a state and transition modeling program, tried to estimate how much of each one of these succession classes would have been on the landscape under natural disturbance regimes. You'll see for the northern hardwoods forest, very little of it was in this young stage with aspen and birch species. Most of the northern hardwoods was in the latter growth stage, large trees up to 50 meters tall with closed canopy, and included sugar maple, beech, hemlock, and yellow birch. So again, we're not saying that managers need to aim for 80% of their northern hardwoods forests being in this late development stage. However, this does provide background and information that might be useful in management planning. Here's an example of how we might use the information to understand an ecosystem. The light gray bars represent reference percents for the succession classes illustrated at the bottom for the Western Hemlock BPS, or biophysical setting, located in Oregon. You'll see that historically, or under reference conditions, most of this Western Hemlock would have been in a closed canopy, tall tree succession class. Today on the landscape, much more of the Western Hemlock is in the shorter closed canopy succession class. This is not to say that managers have done anything wrong necessarily, or that they should do everything they can to move the trees into this later succession class. However, this does provide background and may be useful to you. It definitely fits into Principle 6, where an indicator is to compare historic to current conditions. So the models and their descriptions represent how the ecosystems of the U.S. worked prior to European settlement. They include the model, the actual model that we didn't go into today, and the description which we explored. They're not a prescription, and the models can be hacked. I say that in a positive way. That is, they should be reviewed and modified as needed for a local landscape. And they're not difficult to work with. LANDFIRE delivers tons of GIS data. They're delivered as 30-meter pixel raster data sets and are easiest to obtain through the LANDFIRE Data Access tool. I'm going to explore some of the specific data sets with you in the next few slides. However, here's a list, and you can learn more about any of these at landfire.gov. We deliver the existing vegetation type data, and here's a representative map of that for the Pacific Northwest. I have mapped ecological systems or the existing vegetation type by the National Vegetation Classification System subclass. In the attribute table, you can pick multiple ways to display the data, including the Society of American Foresters / Society for Range Management legend, if that's more useful for you. As in the last map, this data represents conditions on the ground for 2008. We now have 2010 data and will soon have 2012 data. Here we're looking at existing vegetation canopy cover for the Pacific Northwest. And you see that we also denote some burnable developed areas, some burnable agriculture, and other land types in this map. To go along with the cover is the existing vegetation height data. That's again useful when looking at developmental stages. Combined, the existing vegetation type, height, cover, and the biophysical settings data, you can map succession classes. I should note that succession classes may not go in a linear fashion. That is, succession class E, or the darker blue, may not be the oldest growth stage. It depends on how the ecosystems were modeled. We also note that there's a fair amount of uncharacteristic exotic vegetation, which may be cheatgrass or other introduced species. We also deliver several historic types of data sets, including fire regime groups. This represents fire severity and frequency historically modeled and drawn from those biophysical settings descriptions, which I showed you earlier. So we see in the Pacific Northwest, there's a fair amount of burnable vegetation historically, denoted in the red and orange. So we deliver dozens of 30-meter pixel raster data sets. The data is not designed for use at a stand level or even a project level. It's designed for large landscape analysis. LANDFIRE delivers numerous vegetation, fire, and other data sets. And one of the most used is the topographic data set, because we deliver it wall to wall across the country. I'll also note that the data are updated So as I mentioned, we have available now LANDFIRE national data, which represents the landscape in 2000, year 2000. We have 2008 data, 2010, and we'll soon have 2012. So LANDFIRE plus users equal better products. I want to put in a plug for plot data. LANDFIRE existing vegetation type products, including the vegetation type, the height, and the cover, depends on plot data. So what happens is we get the Landsat data from year 2000. We trained it using plot data to help recognize what the particular looks in the satellite imagery would mean in terms of vegetation. We also use the plot data to update or refresh the data. So if you have georeferenced vegetation data, please consider allowing LANDFIRE to use that data for its training. We can make it confidential, and we know that can be important for some of our partners. Relative to the Forest Stewardship Council, consider Principle 6, which is largely about doing environmental assessment across the landscape. I just drew out some words I saw in Principle 6 relative to LANDFIRE data. So wherever you see historic or disturbance regimes, ecological cycle, succession, or RSAs, representative sample areas, you may find that LANDFIRE data helps you, specifically with criteria 6.1, 6.3, and 6.4. You may want to look at LANDFIRE spatial data, the models, and the descriptions. For the eastern upper peninsula of Michigan, you'll see what we did with the boreal acidic peatland systems. Here we simply compared the reference versus current percentage of the succession classes for that ecosystem to give us context and background and to help us consider where we may take management in the future. Principle 7 is about developing and implementing a management plan, mapping forest resource base, succession classes, and historic conditions. As I mentioned earlier, landowners will probably always have better information for their own ownership. Where LANDFIRE comes in is looking at the broader landscape and considering how a particular ownership may fit into it. You may find that some succession classes, for example, are underrepresented across the landscape. Succession classes that you may want to manage for on your ownership based on your objectives. Specifically, LANDFIRE data may help you to meet indicators in criteria 7.1. As you know, Principle 6 is centered on high conservation value forests. Identification and understanding ecological processes may be a place where LANDFIRE fits. Since LANDFIRE describes how the ecological systems, or biophysical settings, of the U.S. looked and worked historically, it may fit into your toolbox in figuring out what you may want to do regarding HCVFs. Also, LANDFIRE maps the biophysical settings and existing vegetation type, which may help you to locate those HCVFs on the broader landscape. In addition to landfire.gov, which I will open up in a moment, we also have the Conservation Gateway, which has heaps of information on LANDFIRE. Use, what not to do. There are tutorials and tons of articles that describe how people have used LANDFIRE data. So with that, I'm going to show you landfire.gov here. If we go to the home page, you find these categories of data sets across the top, which you can explore. There's a link for getting data, and there are tons of other pages embedded within landfire.gov that will help you to learn about the data and to contribute data, as I mentioned. So for fun, I'll click vegetation for a moment and you can see what the descriptions look like. As I mentioned, we deliver existing vegetation type data, and here is a much more complete description than I gave to you, and you'll find the metadata here. So in summary, LANDFIRE is a huge repository, a living program, a community that delivers tons of spatial data, vegetation, fire, and fuels included. Dozens, if not hundreds, of research or other papers feature LANDFIRE data. We have a YouTube channel, Twitter feed, multiple websites for you to learn. And then you have us. This is the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team, who I represent today, and we work for the larger LANDFIRE program, which has dozens of experts, mappers, programmers, remote sensing analysts. We are just a small part of the LANDFIRE program. My supervisor is Jim Smith, who spent decades in the remote sensing and industrial land management sectors before joining the Nature Conservancy. Corey is in Bend, Oregon, and really knows the West Coast. She was a hotshot firefighter and has done a lot of GIS analysis. You see me there with a little bit of snow on my beard. Sarah Hagen is our spatial analyst and can help you dig through specific problems in GIS. And Jeannie can help you find the papers you're looking for. You can always email us at landfire@tnc.org, and we'll help you find the person that can answer your questions. For more information, you can also go to these websites. I do encourage you to email landfire@tnc.org anytime you have a question so we can help you personally. However, if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll find tutorials on how to access the data, how to manipulate the data, and how to use some of the other LANDFIRE tools. And with that, I'll invite you to contact us at any time. Thank you.